Hello and welcome to The Shift, the podcast that aims to tell the no-holds-barred truth about being a woman post-40. Created and hosted by me, writer and broadcaster Sam Baker. My guest today is the acclaimed writer Siri Hustvedt, the author of 7 novels, including my personal favourite, What I Loved, 5 essay collections, a poetry collection, a memoir, The Shaking Woman, or A History of My Nerves. Her work has been translated into more than 30 languages, and she is also a lecturer in psychiatry. Siri's work has always explored the liminal space between mind, memory, and heart, but perhaps none more so than her new memoir, Ghost Stories, a devastating reflection on the 43 years she spent with her husband, the writer Paul Auster, before his death in 2024. The ghost in question is him, but its pages are haunted by the ghost of them.
My last words were, God, we had fun. We did. And, it's strange because I had no idea that that's what I would think of. Your dying, dear 43 years of life together person. And that's what I thought. Oh, God, we had fun together. We really did.
Siri joined me from her home in Brooklyn to talk about long love, losing your everyday, the grief that floored her, and the way an enduring relationship moulds those who dwell in it. We also discussed why happiness is not a goal, how society fears death, learning not to feel guilty about being outspoken, how grief made her creaky, and how she misses the olfactory hallucinations that accompanied her after Paul's death. Now, this is a sad one, but I promise you, there is plenty of love and joy too. I'm so honoured you agreed to come on, Siri. Thank you.
Oh, well, you're
so
very
much.
kind. I'm very happy to be here.
I'm a little bit broken by ghost stories. It's beautiful. And
it comes to us, but it's not all sad, and there are funny parts too.
Oh, there's so many funny parts, and there's joy, so much joy as well.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I did think about that writing the book, you don't want it just to be like, oh my God, it's so horrible. Because of course the whole story is not at all horrible. And, that's kind of what I hold dear is it's not all horrible. No. That's
what comes across. I mean, it's the story of you, isn't it? I mean, you plural. You and
yes,
Paul.
Or the story of us, or as I put it in the book, the story of Paul and Siri, Siri and Paul. And I do think that space, as much as it's talked about in the culture as, the relationship, that it can be ignored because there's so much emphasis on the self in our culture. We are the me culture, and I'm talking about Western, the Western world, as it were. And it's spread, however, I think the kind of, at its worst, there's a form of narcissism that informs the culture that can be dangerous.
I mean, it really struck me reading it that we don't talk about, as you put it beautifully, long love at all. We talk about the problems and how to fix things and what's wrong and the death of heterosexual relationships, but we don't talk about the relationships that are broadly good. Nothing's perfect.
No, of course not. And I really did not want to write either a hagiography of Paul Auster, St. Paul, he was not, and nor am I. And I wanted that to come across vividly. At the same time, I think you're absolutely right. And it's not unusual for human beings to focus on what isn't good. This is entirely normal. At the same time, I think many people find themselves in rich and sustaining and long love affairs. They get shunted under the rug because who wants to talk about them? Well, I did.
Yeah. And I think also there's been, I've been with my husband, married to my husband 32 years. And
you're getting up there.
Getting there, catching you up. Certainly I have in the past felt a bit like, not that it's the shame isn't the right word, but it's something you should keep quiet about because it's a bit smug to be happy with your partner.
Yes. And I do think it can generate some envy. And that's why people are reticent about advertising how long they've been together, right? Because you don't want to offend other people with your happiness. I remember I wrote a book. There were a few. These were friends wrote this, The Summer Without Men. And they wrote to me after and said, "You and Paul are breaking up." I said, "No, we're not." "No, we're not. Why do you think that we're breaking up?" "Well, because I read your book. A work of fiction.
Yeah.
It's a novel."
Yeah, but you're a woman. You can't have used your imagination.
And these were not distant friends, but I did sense a kind of eagerness, almost hope that indeed it was true and that I was writing an autobiographical text, which I wasn't.
No, that's, you've talked a lot in the past and written about your experience of being, a writer who happens to be a woman trying to be taken seriously.
No, that's true. And especially because I think I was married to a famous writer, Paul Auster, the story evolved in ways that took me by surprise. They shouldn't have. And now I'm not so surprised. But it was that he had to be my mentor. A famous moment in Germany, a journalist said to me about my first novel that Paul must have written it. No, the novel is about a graduate student in New York City. I was a graduate student in New York City, having adventures of a strange kind in that city. And a woman. It was very much a novel about, female plights. So why this book could ever have been written by my husband, I don't know. It just never would have happened. But but I think that might have been baiting me too. And once I learned that then makes it much easier to respond because it's not really personal. It's about reinforcing cultural hierarchies that insist that in a couple, the man has to be dominant. Now, a lot of this is unconscious, but I think it goes on all the time.
And trying to get you to react in a interview situation.
Yes, in a defensive and unhappy way. Because if you react in a defensive and an unhappy way, then they've won, right? There's a nice book by Kate Mann that has been talked about quite a bit called Down Girl. And in it, she calls misogyny the police force of these hierarchies. If ordinary sexism doesn't work, they bring in the police force to beat the girl down. And I think that's prescient in this discussion.
Yeah, I feel like when I was reading ghost stories and making notes, and I was thinking, ordinarily, if I was to interview you, I wouldn't mention Paul because it's it's not relevant. It's who you're married to. It's not relevant. So it's, and the listeners will know that. And they'll be thinking, why is she just sitting here talking about her husband? Because your book is about, about your relationship.
It's about us. Yes. So
it's
you can't get away from Paul in this discussion. He's
can't shake
central.
him off.
Yeah, no. And, of course, I never wanted to shake off that man. And inside the marriage, our dialogue, friendship, love affair never stopped developing. That's part of the point of the book is that we are not in static relations with other human beings. And the most intimate ones, if they don't change, if they don't grow, I think it's pathological. Fixity is pathological. I wanted to make that very clear, that time creates an evolution between people. And if it doesn't, that's probably why people get divorced.
Yeah, I mean, if people don't want other people to change, won't let them change, or conversely try to force them to change, they're all, what the kids would call red flags now.
Oh, yes, red flags. Good. People do not reach a state of happiness. I say this in the book. It's not like climbing Mount Everest and then you sit there. Right? Happiness would not be intelligible without sorrow. Right? We wouldn't know what we were experiencing. And the idea that you meet someone, you've achieved happiness, and then you're set for life, which it's a fairy tale idea, and it recurs in the culture over and over again. 7 steps to a better you, or 7 steps to a happier relationship. 7 is the magic number. But I think if a human being actually believes that, pain will inevitably follow.
It's like you say, it's what we're taught in the culture, isn't it? The way the stories all stop at happy ever after.
Yeah. And they're wonderful. I mean, if you think about Jane Austen, for example, many of those books end in marriage, but there's always irony involved. She's not actually, I think, what she's become in the culture. There's tremendous irony about marriage and fixity, but the comic mode requires that the 2 protagonists find each other finally at the end, and it's extremely satisfying. I love those endings, so I'm not dumping on the happy ending as a form, but I do think if people subscribe to that as reality, they will stagnate.
Was there a point ever when you did subscribe to that idea?
Well, my parents were married for almost 50 years. It ended with my father's death. So I think I had this idea of a long-lasting marriage in my mind from my parents. At the same time, I was acutely aware that their relationship too went through ups and downs and developed over time. And, when I moved to New York in 1978, a long time ago, I wasn't really looking for happiness. And I certainly was not looking for a man. I was looking for adventure. And adventures include forms of suffering. So I think in my own mind, even when I was quite young, I didn't have this idea of, tying my life up in a bow, which was probably a good thing.
Totally. What was it like looking back at young Paul and Siri to write the book?
I included these love letters that I wrote to Paul when he left me for a period of days that are still not verified.
That you can't agree on still. Yeah.
We don't know, because I don't know about the postmarks. But returning to those letters was extremely interesting. Paul and I had talked about them for, 43 years, and they took on an almost mythological reality in our marriage without either of us ever rereading them again, right? I was 26 years old. I unearthed them after Paul died, and I did erase 2 names in one of the letters, but they are as written, including comma errors, which seem to have been a rampant problem with me. And I'm happy to say that I've addressed that in my old age. I thought, put it out there with commentary by the older person. There are sentences that embarrass me now. And at the same time, that person who I definitely recognize, is nevertheless an earlier version of the self. I don't feel distressed or upset or angry at that younger person.
You talk in the book about the thing which really fascinated me, which was the extent to which the younger Siri apologized constantly.
Yes. You can look at it from multiple points of view, as I always do, my way of thinking through things. And that is, it's a combination of self-deprecation and tremendous arrogance, right? Because that apology, first of all, it's a way of thinking that everything is on you, that if something goes wrong, it has to be your fault. Now, that's also a very arrogant way of thinking. As I've aged, I recognize that people aren't necessarily upset with me about anything, that it's about their lives, their complexities, and that to take all this on myself is, both unnecessary, stupid, and partly about female learning. I mean, I grew up, as I often say, as a little white girl in a little white town in Northfield, Minnesota. Accommodating behavior was extremely important, and it was praised. See, I think people sometimes misunderstand. Women are accommodating and serve and kind because they're rewarded for it in ways that men aren't, right? For men to just automatically do the dishes or help with childcare, that isn't an automatic function. Whereas I think a lot of girls in my world, and again, I don't want to turn my culture into everybody's culture because it's not, in my world, that was extremely important. And because I feared authority, we're going back to childhood here. When I was an adolescent, I became, an anti-war agitator and a feminist at 14. So I found a place for rebellion against some of those restrictions in my own life fairly early. Nevertheless, I think for decades, I have been working on refining my feminism and understanding more deeply the unconscious structures that are part of our lives and looking into them.
Yeah, I was interested. There's a comment that your daughter Sophie makes when you talk about when you went to the analysis in your 50s, and you came back and said you'd become outspoken. And Sophie says, "No, Mum, you were always outspoken. You just now don't feel bad about it."
Yeah, guilty. It's guilty. Or you don't feel bad or don't feel guilty about it. And I remember that was like one of the great interventions. When a psychoanalyst wants you to be jolted a little bit, there's an intervention. And I thought Sophie made one of the most brilliant ones of my entire life. I think she's right. I was always outspoken. I said what I meant. And at the same time, I would go home after and feel guilty about it. I would lie awake thinking, oh, I talked too much. I was too forceful. I think I might have offended that guy at the other end of the table, and that really was lifted for me by 11 years of psychoanalytically based psychotherapy.
This episode of The Shift is sponsored by Shopify. I can clearly remember starting The Shift. It's such a leap, isn't it? Going out there on your own, doing a new thing. I mean, what if it doesn't work? What if nobody listens? What if all the tech comes crashing down around me? Now, over 5 years and over 250 episodes later, I know different, of course. Starting The Shift was the best thing I ever did. And it helps to have a partner like Shopify on your side to help. For a start, they'll help you get the word out, like you have a whole marketing team behind you with easy-to-run email and social media campaigns. Shopify's your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to shipping, returns, Everything. And if you get stuck, their award-winning 24/7 customer support is always around to advise. It's time to turn those what ifs into with Shopify today. Sign up for your £1 a month trial today at shopify.co.uk/shift. Go to shopify.co.uk/shift. That's shopify.co.uk/shift. What made you go to analysis in your 50s? What made you start then?
The trigger, isn't that interesting? The trigger, which turned out not to be a huge part of the therapy, was something I wrote about. I had this shaking episode when I was giving a talk for my father not at his funeral. It was totally calm at the funeral, but it was a tree planting event at the college where my father was a professor. And then I had several episodes after that. Because I'm a wonk and had been studying neuroscience, neurology, psychiatry for quite a long time, I found myself in a position to write about this mysterious symptom. Was it a hysterical symptom or what's now called functional neurological disorder? Earlier, it was also called conversion disorder. Well, it doesn't quite fit that, but it was clearly linked to emotions. And so I wrote an entire book about the shaking. And that's when I thought, you should, you should try to find out what's going on here. There is an imaginary analyst in that book that I wrote in a relatively short time. I think it was about 9 months. But then I thought, come on, let's go and find out what's wrong with you. Well, that remains somewhat mysterious. What happened instead was, I think, a close examination of what we were talking about earlier, which is, why did I feel so guilty about putting myself in the world? And everyone feels guilty if you say an insulting, horrible thing to another human being. But that wasn't it. It was simply, my lively intellectual presence that would make me feel as if I were out of place or I shouldn't put myself forward in those ways. And that came from where I grew up and I think family dynamics. Exploring that was a great liberation for me.
Your mother was quite, I don't want to say forceful, it's not the right word. She wasn't a shrinking violet, was she?
No, I adored my mother, I just adored her. And as with a marriage, our relationship developed over time as well. Actually, after my father died, he was 81 when he died. My mother was 80. My mother and I had 16 more years of a deep friendship and evolving relationship that I am deeply grateful for. No, she was never a shrinking violet, and she was extremely outspoken when she felt there had been, some moral wrong. And she supported all 4 of her daughters in ways that are invaluable, right? We don't choose our parents. And the fact that I had that mother was a gift, love. But also, as you said, yes, she had her definitely forceful moments. And I appreciated that. She lived through the Nazi occupation of Norway. She was 17 and demonstrated against the Nazis early in the war and had a choice. She was a student then at a gymnasium. They had a choice to pay a fine or go to jail. And my mother went to jail for 9 days. We were so proud of her, the girls.
Badass.
And I mean, she did say later in the war, no one would have demonstrated. This was an early business. She knew they were going to let her out. She was a so-called Aryan girl, not a Jew. So she was very clear, didn't want us to think of her as a hero, but we did. We did anyway.
You've got 3 sisters. Where are you in the sisterhood?
In the world?
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm the oldest, and my next sister now lives in Minnesota, but she actually lived in Asia for 18 years. In Taiwan and Hong Kong, and still does business in China. She's a businesswoman. And the third sister and the fourth sister live in New York, in Tribeca. The third sister is an independent scholar. She got her PhD in French at NYU. And my youngest sister is an architect who has a firm actually with her husband in downtown Manhattan. So we all went on to do things. There are two interesting reasons for that. One is that our parents were supportive of us. And the other is that I think because there were 4 girls and no boy, the pressure that might have been put on that poor boy, he was expected 4 times. Lars.
Oh.
It's going to be Lars.
Oh, dear.
Anyway, Lars never came. And I think my sisters and I don't want to speak for them, but we have addressed this, are all glad of that fact, because it ended up, first of all, not putting pressure on the imaginary boy, but also giving us a kind of freedom that I am not sure in the fairly sexist environment of that world, would have been allowed for a boy, where you just put all your hopes into the masculine basket. So you see, I think our freedom, do you understand our freedom as girls, like, oh, well, maybe they'll marry well, or, allowed us a kind of, movement that maybe a boy wouldn't have had.
Yeah, that's interesting, because they didn't have a last basket to put all their eggs in. So no, they didn't. The boy never came. The resources were free, if you like, for you guys.
Yeah, and they were kind of laissez-faire. They were not interfering parents in many ways. And I'm grateful for that, and actually tried to emulate it in my own parenthood.
Can we talk a little bit about grief? And
yes,
not too much.
It's okay. There's a lot about grief in the book. I think we have to address it. Yeah, we do.
And I think we have illustrated as well how much there is, and how much beyond the grief. Tell me a bit, if you can, about what came first. Was it writing for sanity? Was it wanting to keep Paul alive? Was it wanting to keep Paul and Siri alive?
I think so. I knew Paul was dying. He knew he was dying. That's in the book. We were very clear about it. We talked about it. It was not a hidden reality by any, in any sense of the word. But that knowing, which I think helps, because you imagine what it will be like when the person is dead. Nevertheless, what I think I didn't know was that grief would be a bodily assault. I mean, it was the metaphor that's often used, and I cite in the book, of an amputation, wholly valid. I try to explore why that happens. I think it happens because people who live together and care about each other, the everyday reality is so attached to the presence of the other that your perceptual reality is cut to pieces. There is no one there in the morning when you wake up. Breakfast is different. The lack of dialogue as a widow, I can tell you, is astounding. I mean, I have, my daughter and my grandson and my son-in-law, all 3 of them are very close to me. So it's not as if I have no intimacy in my life, but the everyday perceptual reality of living with Paul vanished. And that had a dramatic physical effect, which changes, as I think everything does. And what happens is you become habituated to that absence over time, but it takes a while. And despite the fact that I knew death was coming, I wasn't aware of that aspect of it.
I mean, I think there's a very short line in the book. I think you say, I think it's in a conversation with Sophie, you say, I'm losing my everyday.
Yeah, that's it.
I just thought, oh.
Yeah. And of course, I think it's really important to emphasize you have the capacity for love. And if you live long enough, you will grieve. you will grieve. And and so this is not some remote or esoteric experience. It is something that comes to many, many, many of us. It is most definitely written about. I did a lot of reading on grief when I was in grief, and still am. But it's changed. At the same time, I think we do live in a culture that is uneasy about death. Even the word, people. I got so many condolence letters, and I put it in the book. Everybody says, so, I'm so sorry to hear of Paul's passing.
Passing what?
What did he pass? Yeah. I mean, where is he going? My mother, too, I'd say my mother just hated that euphemism. And I'm sure that it was inside me and my resistance to it. So I'm always using, dead, dying, and death, because our mortality is something that we don't escape, even though many of us, of course, might like to, or have fantasies of downloading our consciousness into computers.
Can't think of anything worse. No.
It's not going to happen. Ain't going to happen. But there are, that's a widespread fantasy out there, because the mores of grief and mourning have changed, dramatically since the 19th century. We still have rituals, funerals, impromptu memorials that I find very moving. For example, in Minnesota, where they, suddenly teddy bears and flowers appear at the site of a death. People have a deep need for rituals of certain kinds, but they're much less codified, and than putting on black for a year, right? With the veils and the taffeta for people of a certain class were required, but even poorer people would either dye clothes black and go through an official mourning period. Now, of course, if you weren't so sad that your spouse had died.
It's kind of annoying.
Invites hypocrisy, the merry widow. But at the same time, it marks outwardly a dramatic change in human life. And, there's a part of me that appreciates that. In our world, I remember I went to an event, a play reading event that was quite good, actually, but it was not long after Paul died. And I did feel like a shell-shocked human being. Here I am. There are all these other people. At moments like that, a black armband might be useful. People go, oh, yeah, I see. That's why she's a little odd. So I think, in a way, the culture is still working on how to be with people who have, suffered a recent bereavement.
And how do you feel about the word widow? Because I've spoken to other women who said, I absolutely hate it. I hate it.
I actually just wrote something about this. So I've been thinking about widow, and I have continued to refer to myself using that word. It seems to be in a kind of halfway house, that some people use it as a neutral term, and other people feel that it's, that there's stigma attached. I think I occupy both sides. There are whole organizations devoted to addressing horrible widow practices around the world. I'm aware of this. At the same time, I don't want to go around in the world being known as Paul Auster's widow. Right? That in England especially, but in the United States as well, in the 19th century, they would call them, Widow Harrison or widow grievy or whatever happened to be. And that was who you were. So obviously I'm not embracing that idea. At the same time, I would like to have a word for this state. And I do not want to disavow my profound attachment to that man who died. I'm ambivalent, I would say.
When did Paul first say to you that he wanted to come back as a ghost?
It's good. He said it several times, but I believe it was in the last month of his life, maybe the last 2 months. He explained that he wanted to come back, see what I was doing and read what I was writing. And the music my daughter, who's a singer-songwriter, was making, and his son-in-law's photography. All of this interested him greatly, and he realized he was going to miss out on that future. So becoming a ghost and haunting us was a way to express that wish. In the book, I do write about the fact that I felt his presence, not an unusual thing for grieving people to feel. There's a long record of these occurrences that people, of course, explain in very different ways. The day we buried Paul, there was a small ceremony at the burial, and then some food at the house here in Brooklyn. And my sisters took care of all of that. They were brilliant. And at one point, again, somewhat in dissociated shell shock mode, I decided that the widow could do whatever the hell she wants. And I was just going to go upstairs to Paul in my bedroom, lie down. And as I was lying there, I felt him outside the room, coming up the last 2 steps, then walking into the bedroom and standing beside the bed and looking at me. I did not see him. It was a felt presence, but it was as real. Now, I am not telling you that there are ghosts in the world. I don't know. And I do think there are potentially interesting neurological explanations for this, which I do write about in the book as well. But the sensation was one of such tremendous grace and love that it is almost unspeakable. And I feel enormously lucky that I had that experience. I've never had anything quite like that. And I am vulnerable to not just shaking, but, pre-migraine hallucinations, all kinds of things have been part of my living experience. But this was particular. So there you are. And I'm not alone. Dug up all kinds of other experiences. And some people have real hallucinatory experiences where they actually see the person. There was, again, no actual sensual content. I didn't hear, I didn't see, I didn't smell at that time. Later, I had olfactory hallucinations. I seem to be vulnerable to this stuff. But that invisible presence.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how you explain the cigar smoke in that case.
I don't know. What's interesting about the cigar smoke, because of course, so this is what happened. In June, the June after Paul died, on the last day of April, 2024, I was in my study working, and I smelled cigar smoke, the kind of cigars that Paul used to smoke. But I thought, well, someone's smoking here. And I opened the window, or maybe it was already open. I went to the window and inhaled. So then I thought, oh, well, let's see what's going on here. And it was a constant 5, 6, 7 times a day at the most. And it tapered off. It tapered off over time. At the end of April, Paul will have been dead for 2 years. And in the last couple of months, I've inhaled cigar smoke just once or twice. So it's going away. And I have to tell you, I'm sorry about it. Olfactory hallucinations after death, as far as I know, and as far as my reading took me, covered all that well in the neurological literature. Where they are covered is in the spiritualists' literature, where mediums are talking about smells all the time, the presence of the dead person near you. That's hugely covered and has been going on for, since the rise of spiritualism. Well, it's old, but in the 19th century, it became an arena of actually scientific exploration. Then the hallucinations of the smell. And I came to love them. I love them. At the same time, I took it as a form of presence, however it was created, however it was made. I loved having that smell come to me. And there were moments when I felt that this hallucination came when I needed it most. Isn't that interesting?
It really is. And I'm really interested because you described yourself as a wonk earlier. I mean, for a creative person, you're quite sciencey. That was a very unacademic way of putting it.
Yes. No, I'm very sciencey, and it came not really. Well, no, actually, I was always interested in neurology because I do suffer from migraines, and moved me into reading about neurological conditions. I have found that having an interdisciplinary focus has been very good for my thinking, so that I can look at, say, a scientific explanation, understand what the paradigm is, collate that with philosophical, literary, and other explanations that in some way creates uncertainty. But for me, that uncertainty or ambiguity is rich, not impoverished, right? I don't need the final answer. I need simply interesting thoughts that keep me asking questions.
Blowing ad budget on metrics that look great till the CFO sees them. That's bull spend. And marketers are calling it out in Dashboard Confessions.
I remember telling my boss, it'll be good for the brand, when leads were slow. Yeah, it wasn't.
Cut the bull spend. LinkedIn lets you target by company, job title, and more. Advertise on LinkedIn. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a $250 credit. Go to linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
What came first, the wish, drive to be a writer, or the fascination with psychology and psychoanalysis, and neurology?
Oh, the writer. I was only 13. And it was because I was able at 13 to read what I called small print, which simply meant I was able to understand books that I couldn't understand before. And my mother, who was a great reader of novels, just handed me one actually English novel, mostly English novels, after another. So at 13, I was reading, Dickens, the Brontes, Jane Austen in absolute heaven. So I decided that if books were that good, I wanted to try to do that myself. I started writing then and never stopped. I mean, I wrote horrible, stupid things for a long time. But no, that was the urge. It was later, but how much later? It was somewhat later that, I was 15 when I first started reading Freud. And I read Freud because I had read Kate Millett's Sexual Politics, in which she attacks Freud very powerfully and intelligently. And so I decided I should know what this guy was all about. And, Freud turns out to be a complex ticket, but I continually refer back to Freud, even though I don't consider myself a Freudian as such. I didn't buy into every part of Freud by any means, but I continue to be interested in psychoanalysis, which I think has suffered from an unfair reputation. It's a very subtle way of thinking about the psyche, the embodied psyche. For me, it's also complemented by neuroscience, neurology, psychiatry, and other fields.
Yeah, it's so interesting to look back across, your essays, The Shaking Woman, and earlier novels, and to see the interplay of the two disciplines and how they feed in to each other.
Yes. I mean, I've done a lot of lecturing at conferences, and I've come to understand that, of course, that's why they ask me. They don't ask me because I'm, in a research lab and, tickling my mice. It's because I can bring other perspectives to the table. And there are scientists and physicians who are interested in other points of view. So that's really my value, I think.
So you said it's 2 years now, and you are coming up and you are about to take this show on the road.
Yes, I know.
How's that feel?
I'm 71, as I said earlier. And, there are parts of me that are creaky. And I think I got creakier because of grief. And that's something for people to know. When a spouse dies, I think especially in a marriage where the two people were interdependent and mutually glommed, where there was a powerful and. The surviving spouse, both the morbidity and mortality rates skyrocket. I think especially in the first 9 months. So I remember getting through the first 9 months and thinking, I'm still alive. I'm here. It's like I didn't die. I've had all kinds of physical problems. One of them is very interesting, which is I had a lot of intercostal pain, which is rib pain, really acute pain. And it went on for such a time that I thought, you should have an x-ray here and look at what's going on. This is actually in the book. I had the x-ray and I was sure, I am a bit of a hypochondriac. So I always expect, a death sentence. It's just part of my being. Well, there was nothing to be found there except old bones. Later, I read this kind of intercostal pain is not at all uncommon in grief. Now, I didn't get far enough. Probably someone would be able to tell me why that's the case, but that's gone. I don't have that anymore.
You say, why that?
I don't know. Someone poetically said, well, it's kind of in the heart region.
Kind of
and,
lower,
there is cardiomyopathy, I think it's called, which is sometimes broken heart syndrome that people can have after a death, which is, a heart attack created by a grief situation. So I think this is something that's good for people to know. Forms of morbidity after a death are not at all unusual, or that if you have conditions, they may get worse. But there is a road.
Yeah.
There's a road ahead. No, I really mean that because the physiological realities of grief are, I think, hopped over often in the culture. Everyone knows that you are actively missing the dead person, that there's suffering and crying and howling and weeping. But that bodily state that happens, I think, is often under-discussed.
I think, and I don't have personal experience of it, but it feels to me like anything that goes on beyond 3 months is under-discussed.
That's actually quite a brilliant comment that I know I'm going to start thinking about. We can both ask ourselves the following interesting question, why that's the case. And if it's connected to, the speed of information that has power over our lives or not.
I don't know, because it feels like that's maybe it is, because it feels like that's other people's limit for worrying about you.
Except with intimate friends.
Yes,
with intimate friends, I can be very open. But I think in social situations, grief makes people uncomfortable. You know, there you are, the survivor of a couple. And in our case, you know, a couple that some people were aware of as a so-called literary couple. And there you are, and he's not there. And it creates a kind of social unease. People don't exactly know what to do except to offer their condolences, which I think is a perfectly good ritual, and I'm always happy to receive them. At the same time, after that, there's an awkwardness, and maybe that should be addressed.
Yeah, something to think about.
You know, we all die. It's something we don't like to think about, but we do. And proximity to death, as I tried to stress in the book, Paul had a good death. Many cultures have ideas about good and bad deaths, and I do cling to that reality. So for the people who live on, witnessing a good death, despite the fact that, you know, that his treatment for cancer, it was absolutely harrowing. I mean, not everyone goes through what my poor beloved husband went through with a lot of grace and courage, I have to say. But his death itself at home with the people he loved most around him was wonderful. And we were very clear about he did not want to die in a hospital. He did not want machines attached to him. He wanted to die in the library of our house. He specified, this was months before he died, months before we even knew he was dying. He said, well, I know how I want to die. I want to die in the library, you know, in one of those hospital beds, because probably, you know, won't be able to sleep in our bed. And we did it. And, you know, until he was completely lucid, until morphine had to be administered the night before he died. And we were with him nevertheless. And my last words, or near my last words to him, were, God, we had fun. We did. And, you know, it's strange because I had no idea that that's what I would think of. You know, you're dying, dear 43 years of life together person. And that's what I thought. Oh, God, we had fun together. We really did. The jokes flew and the fun kept us going. You know, there was sorrow. There was tremendous sorrow in our shared life as well. You know, the kind of sorrow that many people don't have to live through. But it wasn't what I thought of, you know, before he was taking his very last breaths.
Thank you, Siri, so much. Can you bear if I ask you the questions at the end?
Oh, no, of course. Ask me the
sure?
questions.
It always feels, especially when you've had quite a serious conversation, it always feels so shallow. But what's your emotional age?
At this moment in my life, it's either 6 or 95. And I am not thinking that 95 is worse than 6, by the way. So, you know, 6 is the moment when continuous memory comes into your life. You know, you remember going to school every day, all of that. The world is mysterious, but also wonderful and exciting. So that 6-year-old, I think, remains with me. And after the last 5 years, I suppose, starting with the pandemic, that I think has left a mark on everyone, but often unconscious marks. I think it's affected politics, but no one wants to talk about it because it was so scary. And of course, some people were affected much, much more than others, including the people who lost.
Yeah, many people.
Grieved people who died from COVID. There were many older people and also younger people who died during that period. And I think it was so rough that people forget. But since that, the pandemic and a series of deaths in my own life, the 95, my mother died at 96. And so I'm probably thinking of my late mother. Her memory was impaired, but she was still full of life and energy and a kind of emotional wisdom that was very meaningful for her children. 95 doesn't come from nowhere.
Give us a book recommendation.
Oh, yes. You know, the title is a little, I'm a great fan of an Israeli writer, Siri Hustvedt. This book is also published in in the UK, and it's called Pain. She's a brilliant writer about psychological states. And I was lucky enough to meet her and have correspondence with her. She's a great writer. I would recommend any of her books that have been translated into English. I think about them. She's a wonderful writer.
Thank you. What advice would you give younger women?
I think we can take a little page out of our conversation and say, don't automatically believe that something is your fault without evaluation of the situation at hand. Remember that there's some arrogance in assuming that you're to blame for absolutely everything that happens to you. We are not in control of what other people do, and recognizing that speeds you on your way to greater emotional well-being.
That is so true. All those years that wouldn't have been wasted.
Yeah.
Who is your old broad role model?
Oh, yeah. But, I was thinking about this because most of them are dead. Louise Bourgeois, the great artist who was, as they say, a difficult woman. I like difficult women in general. If you go way back, one of my great philosophical loves is Margaret Cavendish, the 17th century natural philosopher and writer, who I spent actually quite a long time reading. Virginia Woolf attacks her famously in a room of one's own. And I ignored her because of Virginia Woolf, a writer I deeply, deeply admire, but she was wrong about Cavendish. I discovered in her, a philosophical way of thinking that is tremendous. So she's an old broad that is actually having her day in philosophy after over 300 years of neglect. Yay, Margaret Cavendish.
What's your superpower?
Oh, I think we might have said this too. I think, it was something I dreamed of as a young woman, of knowing enough to synthesize ideas from various points of view. And I think I have achieved that in my life. And whether people want it or not, I wanted it for myself. And sometime, I suppose in my late 40s, early 50s, I had this thought, Siri, you can dance now. And that dance has been hugely important to me for many years now.
And last one, how many fucks do you give?
You know what? I saw this question and I realized that I don't understand it. And I actually read, I know it's a common thing. I actually read 2 articles about this giving F's thing. And
I love you, Siri. I love you.
I have no idea what they're talking about. So, because this is the problem. Does it mean that if you give one, it's concern and care? Or does it mean that you're just tossing away what doesn't matter?
Love how you think. The way I mean it, I suppose. So take me personally. I mean,
yes,
I spent a huge amount of my life wasting energy caring about things that really didn't matter. Like what other people thought, those kind of things. I don't think it means, or I don't mean by it that I don't care about the planet, or I don't care about, I'm going to say this, the readers won't know what I'm talking about, number 45 or number 47, to Paul's words, for he who shall not be named. Right. It doesn't mean that I don't care about those, but it does mean that I do not care about the things that were sapping my time anymore. So I think that's what I mean by it. But now I think you're right.
I care very deeply, actually, about what people I love think about me. I mean, this to me is hugely, hugely important. I feel an intense responsibility to those people. And, I think so giving one is important. I mean, the other day I actually had forgotten, which might be a sign of my old age, about, I wrote to a friend saying, I gave you the book, and usually we always, write to each other about our books. She's a writer as well. And she called me right away and said, "Don't you remember, Siri, we had a talk on the phone?" I didn't remember. I mean, it kind of came back to me, but I had forgotten. And she said, "Oh no, but I'm so happy that you reached out and asked me, because if I had, forgotten and then felt bad about it, it could have interfered with our friendship. And I really do not want that. So now I'm much more, I'm quicker to ask, is there anything wrong, et cetera, et cetera." Now, how some idiot man at a dinner party, trying to quash your points. No, I don't care about that. I really don't care about that anymore. And maybe that's 71 in business, right? Someone you don't really know, you've seen it thousands of times before. I just blow that off. And what I do is I usually just smile tolerantly, which drives them absolutely up a wall. So I do have my little revenge moments too.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoy The Shift and would like to show your appreciation, why not buy me a coffee? Go to www.buymeacoffee.com/The Shift with Sam Baker. You can hear a new episode of The Shift every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, please do rate, review, follow, tell your friends, because it really does help other people find us. And if you'd like to know more about my own experience of shifting, my book, The Shift, How I Lost and Found Myself After 40, and you can too, is out now in paperback.